controversial topic. We're going to be talking about homosexuality and how we as Christians are called to respond to it in the modern world, as we know that within my lifespan I've seen both the cultural acceptance and affirmation of homosexuality change, going from a point of being something that was considered taboo when I was young to being fully affirmed and celebrated and now codified into law. And we also see the same attitudes taking place, or a change of attitudes taking place within the church. So this is something that we're not only going to have to be using as a method of defending the Christian faith, especially like the constant calls we're going to have, or charges that we're going to be considered homophobes or bigots. And if we want to take a traditional stance on scriptural interpretation on this topic, but we're also going to have to deal with the slings and arrows from people within the church concerning this topic. So this is a bit of a long discourse, so I'm going to just get us moving on this. Last week we did the Q&A on this, so I think anybody who was here last week is going to be primed on the material. So before we get into it, I wanted to ask if anybody has any questions, any experiences they've had in either trying to evangelize to the homosexual community. I don't think anybody goes out to the community event to do it, but who's had like a one-on-one perhaps with friends, family, co-workers, or maybe has had, like, say, a negative experience at work or school. That was a long question. So, question mark?
Discussing the matter with people. Us both knowing that we're not going to change each other's minds, and that keeping the conversation short and civil. Most of my experience in short and civil.
Alright, that's good. Anybody else?
All I was going to say is that it was kind of funny. I was talking this happened a couple years ago, but anyways. This lesbian who was a manager of a gas station that I used to frequent in Kerrville. I walked in there and she's like, "I can't believe this customer." I was like, "Oh, what happened?" You know? She's like, they come in there and I said, "That's retarded." And then she went on, saying, well, she had said something, and then this lesbian replied, "Well, that's retarded." And she goes, "Why would they take such offense to it? I mean, you say things are retarded. It's just something you said. Some people say it's a what do you call it?
Euphemism?
Yeah, it's like a euphemism. It means that something's dumb." And I'm not talking about the mentally handicapped. And I was like, "Yeah, I got you." I was just kind of like saying whatever something, you say, "Oh man, that's gay," and she looked at me and she goes, "No, that's offensive." And I was like, "All right then."
Right. So kind of like highlighting a double standard they saw. Yeah. So where I've run into mostly in the public is it almost seems like it's assumed within the culture these days that homosexuality is now the norm, and that any kind of less than affirmation of the topic automatically places you in the bucket of homophobe, bigot. And especially if you're a Christian, that means we're automatically starting on the back heel anytime this comes into play. In fact, this is typical when anytime I have apologetical encounters with atheists, is I'm trying to lay out an argument for God using reason, but then typically I get the countering argument that, oh, well, you're a homophobe or you support homophobic ideas. So next thing, you either feel like you're having to defend this side argument, which I would say don't take that bait if you're ever really like you're really trying to present your case.
That's not the topic.
Yeah, exactly. But it is something you're going to run into constantly. You'll run at work, and I've had this happen, like where I applied for a job, like gotten the job, and like we're trying to work out a schedule. Do you have any days you can't do overtime or you can't work? And I'm like, I prefer not to have to work on Sundays because I'm highly active in my church, and also it's my Sabbath day, my rest day. And then without even missing a beat, I'll say something like, well, you're going to have to be very tolerant of everybody here at work because the automatic assumption is I'm going to be the bigot because I'm a Christian. So I find that kind of interesting in talking about double standard in that you had that young lady who was offended at one epithet, which is like the bad, calling somebody names, sort of nice ways of calling somebody names, but is that you have the standard that you can be bigoted towards Christians and thinking that they're intolerant or that we have like say less than good morals in the modern sense that we're not willing to be affirming of everybody or we're not willing to be tolerant of everybody. But we're going to get to that issue of tolerance later because that, as with we've talked about earlier, that word has been redefined and means nothing what the original definition of the meaning ever was. But I wanted to start off with our current state of the culture here. So homosexuals and lesbians, I guess that would be today considered as the LGBTQIA plus, yeah, or the name starts with 2S if you're in Canada, have gained considerable political and social momentum in America. They have come out, as the term goes, left their closets and are knocking on the doors of your homes, not to sound like alarmist here, through TV, radio, newspapers, and magazines. They are preaching their doctrine of tolerance, equality, justice, and love. And this is going to come to a very important answering to an important question that we're going to have, or objection we're going to have presented to us down the line. So, to continue, they do not want to be perceived as abnormal or dangerous. They want acceptance, and they want you to welcome them with open, loving arms, approving of what they do. They stand in strong, kind of a little bit of a jump here. They stand in strong opposition to Christianity because the Bible condemns Christian homosexuality as a sin. Forgive me for my stumbling over words today. So, this is basically the introduction to our class here. Yeah.
May I point out, I don't think we said this last time we did this, but there's actually a new law in Canada that you can't protest a drag show within 1,000 feet of a drag show.
It's been proposed, I think, in Ontario.
No, it's been passed.
It's been passed.
Yeah, it's been passed. There's been a lot of people arrested already over it.
Yeah.
Because the Christians there will protest obvious drag shows that are directed towards children.
Yes.
You know, I mean, if you notice, nobody's protesting these drag shows done at queer bars, homosexual gay bars.
Right.
You know, nobody protests those, but now they're being, and you're seeing a lot of that same, those same laws, not laws, but they're bills. You're seeing a lot of those bills that are being presented. They haven't been passed yet here in the States, but you're seeing those same types of bills being brought up, being sponsored in state legislature.
Well, here's one of the things you have to keep in mind, though, is you're going to get pushback from what you're stating is, and this isn't anything that I disagree with you, but you'd be immediately pointed out by whoever you find. You're trying to equate trans or drag with homosexuality, which they consider those two completely and utterly different, and that they would show you as being ignorant, bigoted, not knowing the difference between the two. But yeah, there are actual hate crime laws already being enforced in the U.S. I think the latest one was a homeless man who defecated on a pride flag crosswalk recently, and I don't remember the city.
Yeah, San Francisco.
Yeah, and then people peeling out on top of the same crosswalks in various towns being levied with hate crime laws. So, yeah, it's something it's definitely going to be, you're going to see more and more in the years to come. Maybe more or less, depending on what state you're in.
So, not reading those.
Yeah. Yeah, so to go back to this. So, in numerous states, several bills have been introduced by the pro-homosexual politicians to ensure the practice of homosexuality is a right protected by law. Included in these bills are statements affecting employers, renters, and schools, churches, could possibly be required to hire a quota of homosexuals, and sensitivity training courses would be strongly urged in various workplaces. That sounds a bit alarmist, but I know there's a lot of push. Actually, something I've gone through in both my theological training and ministerial, theological education and ministerial training, is the big push to get a lot of legal protections stripped from religious organizations so that they don't, that they end up having to adhere to the same workplace rules that all other, let's say, corporations and employers would have to. It's not something that's alarmist at all by any means, but if anybody works anywhere almost these days, you're going to run into this immediately. Like I said earlier, the assumption is I'm a Christian. If you're a Christian, you're going to have to basically affirm all of this, or you're going to be under automatic, well, let's say automatic, but you're going to be under scrutiny, if not punitive measures for not being adherent to the company's diversity, equity, and inclusion principles. So, let's see here. Okay, so okay, yeah, I guess I'll read this. So there is even legislation that would force the state to pick up the tab for defense of homosexual agendas and lawsuits while requiring a non-homosexual side to pay out of his or her pocket. I think it's a little bit dated here. I think that'd be more probably towards the transgender issue right now. But what we're dealing with is what we're getting into the social engineering we're seeing in schools. We're basically seeing the normalization of homosexuality up to and including teaching all the way down at the preschool levels. Anybody has to do is walk into Target starting in a few weeks, and they will already see it if it's not already been set up. An unavoidable push towards promoting this lifestyle. We see it on TV. You can't miss it if you're watching any form of mass media these days. So it's not that it's by any means covert. It's completely over these days. But if we were to even bring this up, it would just demonstrate that we're being intolerant. But how can you say it's not being, that we're being intolerant or we're lying if it is so overt in the way it's being normalized on mass media these days and in every organization we have, including our schools and workplaces. So the Christian church, however, has not stood idly by when it is spoken out against this political immorality. The cry of separation of church and state is shouted at the so-called religious bigots, but when the homosexual community attempts to use the political power to try to control the church and it gets its agenda taught in schools, no such cry of bigotry is heard from the sacred halls of media. And we would say that's because it's not politically correct to side with Christians. And that goes back to what I was talking about with pushes towards removing religious protections, like especially what I remember, I think we all remember when the Affordable Care Act, or maybe we call it Obamacare, passed, that immediately the outcry was that you would have religious organizations that's forced by law to have to pay for abortifacient drugs. So you saw like early moves in that in trying to control religious doctrine by regulatory means. Obviously, thank God it didn't stand up to legal scrutiny, but we will see more and more pushes in this direction. And obviously, the biggest one that I think is under attack is going to be either tax exemption status for the church, and especially where that's been lately under the greatest attack has been the pastor's housing allowance lately. Is that isn't that because generally churches don't pay don't have the budgets to pay pastors like large salaries, so they typically pick up the means and housing allowance, and that one being totally tax free is hugely under legal scrutiny right now. Yes.
You know, they actually this kind of goes to the frame before. With there was a law passed in Canada back in the early 2000s where you couldn't preach Romans the first chapter specifically in a church. But that's I think that's kind of where it started in Canada, and I think they're trying to do the same things here. What's going on is that they want the whole deal with that Obamacare, I believe, was a subversive attack against the church, because if you could not, under the guise of discrimination, if you did not provide like a certain all man or policy for everywhere, that reproductive
Healthcare.
the healthcare that,
Yeah.
that they do,
Restore.
like if they don't offer avenues to abortion, or they don't offer like an abortion pill or and things like that, or churches speak out against it, and things of that nature, then it was discriminatory, where you were depriving someone of their rights, their federal rights. And if you do that, you lose your 501c. And so a lot of there's a lot of churches I think that would be hurt.
Yeah. Well, I know what's happening these days, especially like, so you brought in that restore health, is say you have to take in some sort of federal grant money, any kind of federal funding, which Restore has to do. Then within the terms of the grant money contract, the stipulations are you couldn't then perform religious duties within these organizations, like say evangelizing or trying to share the gospel, duplicating there. But nonetheless, yeah, that's typically how it comes in. I go to a very much Christian school, it's Presbyterian, it's usually conservative, but because they take federal grant money and they get federal student aid and everything else, they are under heavy restrictions as well. So that's
you're not allowed to do
what?
Yeah, you're not allowed to look. For instance, there's some places that you cannot talk about, like you can't talk bad about abortion. You can't speak bad about sex changes. You can't speak ill of like a lot of the. What's crazy is a lot of it has to do with sex.
Yeah, it does. But what I would recommend though is like say if you're using that as an argumentation point in your apologetic point, make sure you got evidence backing that up. Because otherwise it just sounds like you'll get pegged as a conspiracy theorist without any kind of like say citing this say local circuit court judgment or something of this nature where there was say an issue with some employer firing an employee or something like that.
I mean, just today, a customer came into work and started started talking about my boss, Rachel, not Rachel. Started talking about how he resigned from his job because he works at a college and he wasn't using people's preferred pronouns, and it got him in trouble at work, and he almost had to take legal action against them. But just in the nick of time, they were offering employees who had been there for a long time.
So like early retirement.
Yeah, early retirement or whatever, and he got out. But I mean, just today, I heard that.
Yeah, I was written twice at a job for using the word ladies to refer to the women at my church in the third person.
Right.
Yeah, so it's not that it's anything that we're not running into in public, you know. And then once it came out that I wasn't towing of the modern sensibilities, I was sidelined and eventually just gently pushed out the door.
Right, and this isn't Chicago or no. It's just like
it's even in small town USA. Yeah. Yeah. Well, there's unfortunately it doesn't look like.
Right.
Yeah, the Bible Belt is honestly.
But you understand.
Yeah. It's like once it brings up imagery of the Rust Belt, you know, where once the steel manufacturing heart of the world is now fallen in disrepair and decay. We kind of see that kind of similar. And that's something that might even be thought of as something to write up on. You know, would you consider that not the Bible Belt, the apostasy belt? I don't know. Yeah. But well, I think we've talked about that a bit. Where I've talked about where a lot of Christian fundamentalism has been